Obi Abuchi here with the Leading from Your Core podcast and Vodcast. This show is dedicated to helping leaders all around the world discover leadership wisdom, stories, and insights that will enable you tap into the power of leading from the inside out. Our current season is focused on mental resilience among leaders, and I am delighted to welcome Perry Timms on the show. Welcome, Perry. Great to have you on the show today.
Welcome, Obi. So pleased to be here. I mean, I do a few podcasts, so I hope I'm kind of in the zone when it comes to delivery. But let's just say I like nothing more than this kind of exchange. So thank you for having me on it.
No, thank you. I'm excited. Perry and I actually met recently at Yetunde Hoffman's What's Your Story conference and absolutely hit it off. I felt an incredible resonance, so I'm excited. And for our listeners and viewers, Perry is the founder and chief energy officer of PTHR. I love that. A growing consultancy setting out to create a better business for a better world. And that's just an inspiring vision already. He's an international and two-time TEDx speaker and award-winning writer on the future of work, HR, and learning. He's written 2 fantastic books, Transformational HR and The Energized Workplace. And his first book, The Transformational HR, was named one of the top 100 business strategy books of all time. So I know we're going to have an incredible conversation now. Perry, once again, great to have you on the show. And I've said a little bit about you already, but just to kick things off, it'd be great if you could tell us a bit about yourself. And then particularly, what do you enjoy most about being a leader? So over to you.
Thank you, Obi. What a great way to start. So yes, I think a few things about me that are not necessarily on the professional biography is that I often call myself like a total enthusiast. And lots of people try and put labels on you like expert and guru. And I'm like, no, I'm just an enthusiast. But that enthusiasm is because of what you said about the mission. I've had a really, really positive working life. I started in the civil service. I moved into the non-profit sector, and for the last 10 years been running my own business. And I can honestly say there are a number of days that you can probably count on one hand where I've thought, what's it all about? Don't like this. Yet people sometimes have that experience every day. And I think that's so unfair. Work is hugely important to us in esteem, economic, social relationships, purpose, living a sense of meaning, and that people have to transact through work is not fair for me. I just don't think it's right. So my mission is definitely to put what I've experienced to many people's perspectives and experiences of work. And people kind of go, well, that's a big mission, isn't it? It's like, well, you know, attach yourself to something more important than you are. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. So my work is never done. But I like that. So to your question, what do I enjoy most about leading? Ironically, it's when you get to create leaders around you. And so it's not about you. So I'm fascinated by self-managed systems and the concept of leadership being like a space or a time or an instance or a particular circumstance and not about just people. So I'm very into that distributed, servant, dispersed kind of thing. And when you talk about the core, I think that's very much at the core of how I want to be known in a leading capacity, and what I want to see about the leadership that I have is about creating leading qualities in others.
Wow. We haven't even got started, and yet I'm having these shivers down my spine with things that you've said already. Love it, Perry. I just want to go back to the first thing you said about being an enthusiast and work. My first book was called The Magic of Monday, and it was really to challenge this idea that most people say, oh, thank God it's Friday, right? And they're living for 2 days and missing out on all of the magic that can happen Monday through Friday when we've really connected with a purpose. And when we're tapping into our strengths and our abilities and using that in an incredible way to serve in our communities, in our businesses, right? So I love that's a big part of your passion and enthusiasm in the workplace. And and the fact that you, as a leader, it's about creating that space for others to fly, for others to thrive, for others to become leaders themselves, right? And if ultimately leadership is about influence, we all have influence, right? It's just a question of how we are using that and how we see our own sense of worth. So that's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, the theme of this show is, and this season that we're in, is mental resilience, particularly mental resilience among leaders. And mental health, mental resilience, mental strength has been such an important topic. I mean, I think it always has been, but more so in the last 2 years. And I'd just love to explore with you, what does mental resilience mean to you? And why do you think it's important, not only in leadership, but also in life?
So I will confess, Obi, that on times I have an aversion to the word resilience, and I'll tell you why.
Sure.
Because I think it's sometimes been hijacked by the management thought leadership industry as you need to be resilient, you need to be tougher, it's all about you. And I feel a little bit discomforted by that, because I think sometimes what their intent is good, to create empowerment and perhaps drive, but I think it's a bit of a sort of almost persecution in ways, because it's often like, but the system I'm in will determine sometimes whether I can be that strong or not. And so therefore, if you expect me to be strong in all ways at all times, that's a big ask. Sure. So I do have that little reaction to it. However, I totally get where you're coming from. So I will answer your question. It is, for me, I think it's about self-worth. I think the whole concept of mental resilience comes from how much do I back myself? And if I don't, what do I need to do about that? I think there's something in our conversation before this podcast, Obi, when you talked about community and you talked about others around you. I find it incredible that mental resilience isn't just about you. It's who's on your bench, Absolutely. Who's with you, who do you rely on, who plugs your gaps, who sparks you, who holds you, because you do that for others too, and somebody will do that for you. So I think it's knowing that. I think that self-worth and that knowing who you're with, incredibly helpful when it comes to mental resilience. And I think it comes into the concept that I'm really fascinated by, which is energy management, how we manage our energy, how we know when we are good, indifferent, up against it, really over the top, excited, or really challenged, underwhelmed and frustrated. Because I think sometimes the resilience we need takes a different shape or form depending on that circumstance, where we are, what's going on, who's with us, and really what's at risk, I suppose. So it's quite calculated. I think mental resilience is not just a sensation. I think it's also the construct of strategies and self-talk, but I think it comes back to this core thing, and I love that you use this word core. This core is, what's my self-worth? How do I back myself? That's how I'd describe it anyway.
Yeah. You started off with that, just that self-worth, backing myself, went deeper into, hey, the construct, how do I see myself? How am I showing up? And just back to that. And I feel like we could talk for hours just on that self-worth piece alone and the incredible power that it gives. You touched on some of the things like our self-talk, right? What do we say to ourselves as leaders? Is it, hey, it's been, a terrible quarter. I'm terrible. I don't deserve to be here. Is that part of your self-talk, or do you have an ability to be more objective about it and just say, hey, the quarter for my business, quarter for my organization, quarter for my team, whatever the case, that doesn't change the worth that I have, the significance that I have, and therefore I don't fall into this downward spiral of some negativity and therefore impacting on the energy that I project.
Well said.
And
well said.
the conversations that I then have, because ultimately, and I hear you on the whole mental resilience piece, that sometimes it can be used as a stick rather than really understanding, hey, how's your internal world? And is it as healthy as it needs to be? Is your mental climate, is it enabling you to show up as your best and therefore impacting on your behavior and therefore the relationships with people around you? And when you can get that, when every leader can just say, hey, I'm absolutely full of worth, full of significance, and therefore I can express that rather than do things to get it, then that's a powerful place for me to be as a leader.
That's a great ad, Obi. I was taken to the thought then as you were speaking about your sort of duty of care as a leader. So the mental resilience isn't just how am I looking after myself. The mental resilience is also how prepared am I to hold the space for others to feel the same and to be the same level of equipped nature to deal with problems, because I don't want to rescue people, but they need to know that I'm here for them in that sort of way. And I actually find that quite a resilience stimulator rather than a detracting feature, because if you're trying to rescue people, there's something not quite so right about that. But if you're really supportive and you hold the space and you're building them up and you're backing them and so on, there's something resilient in you that comes through. You're like, I am not overtaken here. I am backing that person. I'm showing them something. And that, I think, is a resilience gift back to you. I think there's something you've just made me think about that's very powerful.
I can't help in turn think about this idea of as a leader, I believe you can't give what you don't have. And I often talk about the importance of leaders putting their oxygen mask on, the popular experience when you're on a plane and the safety announcement, make sure you put your oxygen mask on before your loved ones. So you talk about sort of rescuing. There's a challenging situation. If you don't know how to hold this space for yourself and say, I'm looking after me, then it's hard to do that purposefully for those that you have a duty of care for. So very powerful. Very powerful.
Nice. Thank you.
I'd love to move into how this impacts both success as a leader or failures or challenges as a leader. Just what have been some of your experiences, maybe a high that you've had, a low that you've had, and what has that revealed about your mental game and what's going on the inside, and whether it's enabling you or detracting from the impact you're having as a leader?
These are good then questions, Obi, because they take us from slightly conceptual theory into actual lived events and so on. I don't have to look too far, and it's probably a little bit of a regular viewpoint for people, but the initial COVID-19 reaction had an enormously destructive impact on the business that I'd just expanded. So March 2020, more people involved because we were doing quite well, and then everything shut down. And my first reaction was, what am I going to do now? I have never dealt with this. This is a real sense of, incapacity and incapability. And I really went into myself and said, what can you do? And like you said, you can't give what you haven't got. So several things I think happened there, which was the first instinct was to just be active, just do things and say things, because withdrawing too much, I think, would have given the wrong signal to people around me. So I wasn't about to, start declaring all sorts of stuff on LinkedIn to try and generate sales. That was vulgar. But I did want to write about the turmoil I was feeling. So I did. I wrote about the turmoil. I said, you're probably thinking this, and I am too, but I'm also thinking about emergency workers and people keeping the world going, and I'm thankful for them. And therefore, I'm feeling troubled by the fact that my instinct to save my business is not recognizing these people who are doing great things. And I can't square that, and I don't know what to do about that. And I got a massive response to it, a huge response saying, you've just named what's going on for me. And bizarrely, as a result of it, I got people saying, I might want to do some work with you then on things of this nature about how we recalibrate and stabilize. And I was like, oh, this has inadvertently become a tactic to rescue, and it wasn't, but it came that way. So yeah, so that is where I think mental resilience was really important, to know the ripple effect of what you were feeling needed to come out, but in a very sensitive way. And I was really aware of that, and I genuinely would say to the team, I don't know how much you want me to share, so I'll share a lot and you tell me if it's too much. So we kind of agreed. Do you know what I mean? Because they may have felt more anxious if I was telling them that I felt uncertain to the hilt of not knowing where to start. But equally, they were very good. They were like, no, just let it all out and we'll work it out. And that was very comforting for me. And then they came back and said, yeah, actually, this is good because we now see where we can help more. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even think that. Of course, it's not just me to rescue this thing. You're here too now. Do you know what I mean? So I think opening up was quite deliberate, but like I say, sensitive. And I think when I look at how perhaps things went, I look back now on 2020 as a year where we just got by. But 2021 was incredible. It was 100% up. And so I think we laid the foundation in 20 by surviving and tightening and being really clever about what we did with our time and emotions and support. And it allowed us to experience a really terrific 21. So that's where I think resilience in that sort of theme really did count for a lot.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Perry. And I want to react and pull out some things for people to hear and see. And the two things. One, you talked about being active, right? So not withdrawing. The purpose isn't to just withdrawing ourselves, because sometimes people think when we talk about leading from the inside out and reflecting, it's like, hey, go away, go into a cave and be there for years. That's not what this is about. It's about being able to purposefully take what's going on the inside, noticing what's going on. And then I love the way you processed it. And you said at the end there, just being really smart about our emotions and our thoughts, right? And just, hey, what's going on for us? And what does this mean? And just the authenticity and the vulnerability that you showed, and therefore people reacted to that, right? And amazingly created opportunities that you didn't at the start think was going to be there. So some incredible stuff for leaders to realize the power of vulnerability, the power of authenticity, and how that actually helps us win more hearts and minds than we thought in the first place. Well said. So
I think it comes back to the sense of doing being very important, but not just any doing. It wasn't just let's just chuck and see what sticks. It was very discerning, and it was quite pacey because we didn't have time to deliberate for months on what we would do to rescue things. But at the same time, it wasn't breathless. So there was a lot of thoughtfulness going on. Now, you might call that mindful, and I think it was, but it was equally very social. So I think including people in your thinking in that respect, with a kind of caveat that I might be oversharing sometimes, or it might be a bit like risky and dangerous, and it feels a bit like, oh, that's serious, just to prepare people for it. I think that's what really helped. And so would I do the same again? Absolutely. I think that's the thing. It's a non formulated but deliberate way of saying when it is a bit crisis, that is not the time to shut up, and it's not the time to panic, but it is the time to be active.
Yeah.
Now failures. You want to know about failures?
Yeah.
But tell me more.
No.
Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do that now.
Let's share
right, so
about a failure too. Yeah,
big time failure. And this was really the only time when I went to a GP and I was medically signed off because the stress was too much. And I really didn't want to be in that space. And so it was my last corporate job. It had gradually become more demanding in a way that wasn't really what I wanted. And by that, I mean the sort of external influences that were bolted on and choices I had, which were difficult to make. And so you kind of go, well, I'll take the sort of lesser of the two evils in many respects. And as a result of it, my solution was, I know, I'm just going to be more and more busy. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to keep piling it on, because that way I won't have to think about it and I'll just keep doing, and I'll add value that way. So my self-worth at the time was show just how much you can do. That was the strategy. I mean, it sounds mad now, but at the time I thought that's what it, and it all collapsed like a house of cards. It was the most out of character I'd ever been. It was the most risky, dangerous, and downright careless I think I'd ever been. And suddenly people around me changed. And I thought it was them, but I think it was me, because of how I was. They were a bit like, what's going on with him? And they backed away and they dare not probe. And yeah, it did. It literally collapsed like a house of cards. So I exited that job within 10 days of having that sign off.
Wow.
Not resilient at all then.
Sure.
Not clever, not determined, just convincing myself that the tactic I had was the right way through it, when really I knew it wasn't. I was kidding myself. Yeah. That's what happened there.
Yeah. Thanks. And again, helpful to see. It feels like night and day. Your story from 2 years ago, so much more grounded, clarity, a thoughtful, backing yourself, and of course there still being some uncertainty, but a real backing. And yet with that with the story of your last corporate role, it feels not really backing yourself, rather flogging yourself, right? It's just working yourself and hurting and not the same level of self-compassion that you described in the last
very true. Great observation.
So
and you're right about that. I was flogging myself, and I think I was actually trying to run myself into a wall. That's what I was doing. I didn't know it, but I think that's what I was doing.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's helpful hearing that, and hopefully these both stories connecting with some of the people listening and watching this. And I want to draw something out with our next question. Just over the years, just from my own experience, some of the difficulties I've had, I haven't been signed off, but I remember a period where it was so dark and so challenging, and that finances were running dry, that rather than my reaction wasn't to flog myself and run myself into the ground, it was to take myself out. It was suicidal thoughts, and just thinking, I don't have what it takes here, and I want out, right? And so there are different ways that people can react to some of these challenging experiences. And then since then, just with the leaders that I've coached and trained, I've discovered this truth that when life squeezes you, like it did 2 years ago, like it did many years ago for me, for you, what you're like on the inside comes out, right? and so how, in your experience, how can leaders make sure that what they're like on the inside is more of that self-worth. It is backing oneself. It isn't flogging oneself. So it's as resilient as possible. What's your advice on
what
that?
A great link you made there. And so in thinking about this, I think the first thing that would come out from me when there's the squeeze is sensitivity. And I think what I did in the failure scenario is that I knew there were sensitivities there, but I felt they would weaken my position. So I desensitized myself to them. I ignored them and I suppressed them and I pushed them away. Yet I know for a fact that I'm at my best when my sensitivity is alerted and it is conscious, and it's then channeled, Obi, because I think it's an energy of mine that I have misunderstood in the past, and it's taken me a while to understand what it's calling me to do. And luckily 2 years ago, I knew what it was calling me to do, and I knew how to address the sensitivities. And I still get challenges now about sensitivity, because I might overreact sometimes to a word or an action. But I'm getting better now at socializing that with others and saying, look, I've had this, what's going on? And it comes back to the bench thing. I need people around who can not just validate that, but just give me a different perspective. So I think another thing that comes out of me when I'm squeezed is my need for social connections with people I trust who can handle a different perspective than mine. Yeah, definitely that. And then I think the other thing that comes out for me when I'm squeezed is this doing thing. I have a bias to action. I just like, I don't know if you've had this when you've had management teams around you and you've created a strategy and you're all sitting looking at the flip charts or the outputs, and then everybody's going, that was good, and they're ready to go. And you're like, well, hang on a minute, who's doing this? By when? And how? It's like, that's not done. that's just done the plan. That's not done it. It's not going to magically. Oh man. So when I'm squeezed, I know that my bias is something's got to be done, and it might be one tiny thing, but that one tiny thing gives me the comfort that I'm doing something. So I have to be careful about it sometimes, because I might want to create so much action, I'm not being thoughtful, so I have to catch myself. But I even think of the thoughtfulness now as doing. I'm like, I'm thinking about this, I'm processing this, so I'm doing something. So I allow myself now to do that. People often talk about my pace of work and the volume that I have on the books at any given time, and I'm like, but I'm not being unthoughtful about any of this. I'm thinking about this, and I'm holding lots in my space. But equally, I hate things that are not activated.
Sure. Oh, love it. I especially love the distinction now for you compared to that last challenging experience of the sensitivity, just being sensitive to what's going on, and the importance of that, right? Because sometimes we want to numb things, and what we don't realize is by numbing that sensitivity, we're also numbing a lot of the positive elements that could come out. And so we actually want to be aware of what's going on, and having some of those trusted people around us that we can just bounce things off, and just saying, hey, am I overreacting? Is this, how are you seeing this situation? And helping us get perspective on things, because what we don't want to do is lose perspective. That's always the challenge in these moments when we're squeezed, that we lose perspective, and therefore we can't take the right action, or we're just reacting, and therefore it becomes a really challenging situation. We get ourselves into a deeper hole. So
great summary.
Amazing tips there.
Mm-hmm.
A final, just some advice from you then to leaders out there, how to best develop their mental game, this what's going on the inside, just to make sure that they're absolutely showing up as their best for themselves and for the people around them.
So one of the things I learned in that 2020 episode was that actually thoughts are terrific, but they can be quite jumbly and messy and incoherent, right? They circle around and they come in and out. so quite literally what I'm suggesting people do.
Have you been looking in my head?
I don't know. But maybe the mirror neurons are firing. Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? So my tip there is, what you absolutely have to do is kind of journal your way through this. And I don't mean you have to journal it in the formal sense, but it has to get out your head and written down or drawn or some manifestation of it. I mean, we hear about people with career aspirations who create like a mood board of what they want in their future, right? So it's almost like, well, who's to say you can't do that at a time of a bit of crisis? Because you need to make sense of what's going on. And sometimes the only way to do that is to actually take the thing out your head and put it somewhere else and move it round and make it pliable and give yourself the headspace. Then you're not all holding it in thought, in dialogue. So that's my first bit of advice is use some technology, even if it's a piece of paper. Definitely. Yeah. Now, from that might come a plan, which is great, but equally so, sometimes you just need to get it out. So do that. My second tip, I suppose you'd say, is this bench thing I've been talking about. It's like, it's genuinely not just about you. Your mental resilience is like backed up by the inputs of others. So think of yourself as a cloud-based server, right? You're running all this stuff, but actually you need people to come in and deposit and extract from that server in order to make what you are worthwhile, right? So I've even labeled some of the people I think I've got on my bench that might help others create their own bench in a similar way. The most important one is a confidant, somebody who gets you, the person, not just you, the role, right? Somebody who knows, I know who you are, I know how you work, I know what you think and say and do, because they're the person you go, help me with this. I need some additional computing power. And so that confidant, I think, is super important to have as your first part of the bench. And I think about like the Chicago Bulls back in the day with Michael Jordan. Like I'm sure his confidant was probably Scottie Pippen, because they just knew each other. Yeah. So that then the second person on your bench is really important and actually quite challenging at times. I call them the earth wire. Who makes sure you are not short-circuiting? Who will tell you whether you're stepping on a landmine? Who will tell you whether you're being out of sync? And that person's really, really, really vital. And so they might not be your best friend, but they might be somebody who knows your best interests.
I love it.
And the other person to have, so it's only three you really need, is a co-inventor. You need somebody who goes, I love that idea, and what about? And can we and should we? Because sometimes I find inventive thinking is great when it's a solo pursuit, but it's better when you've got a co-inventor, because it can just take off or it can compress or whatever. So you've almost got safety, calibration, and co-creation there.
Love it. Wow, thank you.
I think those are my tips. Write it out and get a bench.
Write it out, get a bench, get your Scottie Pippen, get your Earthwire, get your co-inventor. And that helps you show up as your best self and give even more than you thought was possible. So
totally
brilliant. Well, Perry, that brings us to the end of our time. A real joy speaking with you. Thank you again for being on the show. I no doubt hope, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers enjoyed this. And final word from me, remember that if you want to be purposeful, courageous, and a resilient leader, it starts from the inside out. Have a great day and see you all on the next show. Thanks, Perry.
Thank you.